Thank you. I'd like to call the Human Resources Committee to order. It is Monday, September 12th, 6:20 at the Nashua High North Boardroom. Present, Mr. Hollowell.
Are you calling the roll, or you're asking me to call?
I'll call the roll. It's
Yes,
short.
I'm here.
Dr. Murataki? Must be on business. He's not here. Anybody hear from him? Is he going to be late? Okay. Mrs. Oden, I'm here. So we have a quorum. The first agenda item is the non-affiliated staff proposed for fiscal year 2017, the annual increase.
The record shows Mr. Kaufman is here, who's the alternate, so he can vote.
Mr. Kaufman arrived at 7:22.
6:22.
6:22, thank you.
Mrs. Oden,
Yes.
make a motion. Move to approve the non-affiliated staff increase proposed, move to approve the FY17 proposed increase in non-affiliated staff salaries of 1%.
Looking for a second? Mr. Kaufman?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed?
Okay. We weren't going to have a discussion. Anybody want to discuss that?
Anybody want to discuss this?
Okay.
Just for the general public, I believe it's a 1% increase, just as some of the other contracts that were settled were.
Well, I guess just to say one thing, this was the 1% essentially budget for raises across the board. So this is just an acknowledgement of what we plan for in the budget.
Okay. The second is POP's GCOA, Evaluation of Athletic Coaches. And I believe Ms. Gingras is here to address some of this. Okay,
Well, actually,
You're gonna-
yeah,
okay.
okay.
I'm sorry, Ms. O'Gara is going to address this.
So the policy that you had, that you were given in your packet, is the policy that I believe came from the policy committee with Ms. Gingras's changes on it. And I changed a few things. And the board had also asked to change the process about the coaching contracts and all that. So this incorporates those changes as well. Would you like me to go through the changes one by one, Mrs. Oden?
I think that would be a good idea, especially for the public watching. Thank you.
So the first change is, and it still shows as lined out, but it should stay in there, is that the superintendent and administrative staff will develop procedures and instruments for evaluation in line with the following guidelines, because the superintendent always has authority over all the evaluation tools. So I recommend that phrase be kept in. And I added that the athletic director will make the evaluation tool available to coaches when hired.
I have a question, please.
Yes.
It's still struck out in the copy that I have, I believe.
It is. It's the track changes in Word can be difficult at times.
I just want to make sure that people understand that it is going back in.
Back in.
Howard?
Thanks. Is it just the first introductory statement that's kept?
Yes.
The
And
other
also-
bullets are removed?
Yes, the other bullets that are removed are removed.
I move to approve POP's GCOA. If I get a second, then we can amend it.
Second.
Seconded by Mrs. Oden. Ms. Van Twyver.
Elizabeth?
So that was the only change that had,
No.
oh, okay. So you're going to continue with the changes?
Yes.
Okay.
Howard?
I was going to, if we have a motion to accept and the discussion is not complete, right? You put a motion.
This is discussion, isn't
We
it?
should
Oh, good.
always,
I
we should
wanted to-
always have a motion on the floor when we're discussing
Okay,
something.
thank you. I just want to clear that we're not approving anything yet.
We do have to amend, so that will come, that motion will come after we finish the discussion. Thank you.
On the second page, if you flip it over, there's a paragraph in blue that's all crossed out. So I took all of that out.
I'm sorry, the copy that we were supposed to, I'm sorry, Mrs. Oden.
Yes.
I recall an email saying we were going to receive updated copies at the meeting. Are they available?
Oh,
Are we short?
Mrs. Oden?
yes.
Ms. O'Gara, are you saying that this is not going to be struck and it's going to be left in? Is that what you were saying, or?
The whole paragraph that starts with the evaluation criteria shall be based on respective job descriptions, handbooks, coaches' handbooks, and other criteria specified by the principal or his or her designee. All of that can come out.
Delete it?
No.
Okay. I just didn't know whether it was the same problem as the first one.
Mike, do you have another one? The one I have doesn't have the blue cross.
That's one I think I just gave you.
Well, I gave it to Sandra, she didn't have it. Oh, okay. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Howell?
I want to understand what it is we're doing here. There is a policy that was approved by the policy committee, correct?
Yes.
That is not this,
No.
correct? Is that what we got in our packet?
Yes.
Yes.
And so you are now highlighting the things you would like us to amend to take out. Is that you're asking? So if we can go back to the first page. So you want to keep in the line that says the superintendent, administrative staff, ... And you want to add the bullet, the athletic director will make the evaluation tool available to coaches when hired, correct?
Yes.
And on page 2, and the bulleted list prior to the paragraph you just discussed, there's a line that ends in good sportsmanship that now ends in good sportsmanship and leadership. Did you add and leadership?
No, that came from Lisa.
So that was passed by the policy committee?
Yes, that's my understanding.
What's confusing is normally the track changes keeps track of colors so that it makes it easier.
Yeah, it was here.
Not really sure
It's in
why
there.
that's a challenge.
It's in there.
Okay. And then you want to take out the whole paragraph, which a composite of the thoughts, et cetera, was that struck by the policy committee? It's hard
Yes.
to compare the two.
A composite of the thoughts was struck by the policy committee.
I can't get that there. This was policy.
Okay.
Good right now.
Okay, if you go down to the bottom of page 2, bullet point 4, I would like to make the change that the head coach will evaluate his or her staff after meeting with the athletic director regarding the staff's performance. Typically, head coaches and junior varsity coaches don't necessarily have the same level of expertise that the athletic director would have in doing evaluations, and she should review them before they give an evaluation to a freshman or a JV coach.
Anybody have any questions?
Well, I have a question on that, which
Okay.
is, this sentence doesn't just apply to freshmen or JV coaches. Right?
It also applies to, it says in bullet point 2, high school and middle school head coaches will be evaluated by the athletic directors, sub-varsity and assistant coaches, so includes assistant coaches as well, will be evaluated by the head coach with input and final approval of and by the athletic director. That approval by the athletic director should come before an evaluation is presented to an employee.
Just a minute. Are you done? Before we go on, let the minutes reflect that Mr. Farrington and Dr. Murataki arrived at 6:30. Mr. Kaufman?
Thank you. I'm kind of confused. I would think that the head coach would evaluate their staff before meeting with the athletic director, so the athletic director could view the review and maybe recommend changes to it, but
That is exactly what I am meaning. So if it needs to be wordsmithed, that the evaluation should be reviewed by the athletic director prior to that head coach sitting with a sub-coach or assistant coach.
yeah, I don't see that in number 4. I mean, I guess in a way it is there, but I don't get the full intent that the head coach would evaluate the staff prior to meeting with the athletic director. I mean, write a review prior to meeting with the athletic director, and then confirm that assessment, if you will. But subsequent, after that meeting with the director, they can then meet with the coach. I think that's what you're trying to do. Is that right?
That is correct.
Yeah, I don't think this language accomplishes that.
So how about if we say the head coach will write a review before meeting, will write a review for the athletics director's approval before meeting with the staff regarding their performance?
Mrs. Oden?
Yes.
I'd recommend maybe that this should go back to policy and let us do the wordsmithing over there with Ms. O'Gara's help.
I don't have a problem with that. Mr. Hollowell, do you have a? I know we've been trying to do this for a while, but,
Yeah, I think I'd
Okay.
support that.
do I need a vote on this?
Before you,
Elizabeth?
I have something else that I wanted to say. Struck from the title is the extracurricular advisors, and so I think that the policy committee should also bring up the subject of what we're going to do with extracurricular advisors. And then the old 8213.1 needs to be rescinded after both have been passed.
So, Nancy?
Thank you. I think there was some mention by Ms. Susing that extracurricular advisors would come before the policy committee.
Well, it
'Cause we
hasn't
did-
yet.
We did ask that when this came through back in April. That was the expectation. I just have a question. Is Ms. Gingras going to come back to policy? 'Cause or tell us now, I just want to know what her feedback is on these new changes.
I can certainly come if you'd like me to. Mrs. O'Gara and I have spoken about the changes, she's right.
So you're comfortable with them? Okay, that's very good to know. Thank you.
Mr. Hollowell?
Yeah, can I ask the process here? Was Ms. O'Gara not part of the process of going through this policy?
No.
Move to refer back to policy committee.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. Ms. Van Twyver?
May I make a recommendation to the policy committee that they take it up at the next meeting, if possible?
So, Nancy?
We have 4 things on the agenda already, but we could certainly put it at the end if we have extra time.
Well, this has been in the works since April.
Mrs. Eam?
Can I just ask a question for clarification? As I sit here and look at this, I would think that Mrs. Gingrich would be the go-to person for this and yet it seems like it came through HR instead of Mrs. Gingras. May I ask what the policy of your committee is? Or if it just doesn't,
May I say
sense?
something in response to that?
Sure.
The process of the coaches and the advisors goes through the HR department. So the letter, once a coach or advisor is nominated, once anybody is nominated, there is a letter given to them, and then there is a coaching contract and a letter of intent that is provided to them that comes from the HR department.
and I'm not challenging that, Mrs. O'Gara. What I'm saying is that if this is evaluation of athletic coaches, then that, I would assume that comes under the direct supervision of Mrs. Gingrich. Of course, I'm thinking back to the last
So
game we had.
So typically, human resources functions, one of them is overseeing evaluations.
Mrs. Oden?
Yes. Mr. Hollowell?
Mrs. Ziem is not talking about, I think Mrs. Ziem is asking, was Ms. Gingras present at the policy committee meeting? I believe she was, correct? Am I right?
Yes, because to me, she's the one this is going to directly affect. It's her job to do these, and so I mean, I hear what you're saying, and I think everything regarding personnel comes through personnel, but that still doesn't change the fact that Mrs. Gingrich is the one who has the oversight responsibility, I would assume, of these coaches, and so that's why I'm asking. Thank you, Mr. Hollowell. You clarified my position well.
Okay. Mrs. O'Hensy?
Thank you. I suspect when we went through policy, we had Ms. Gingrich and we passed a policy sending it to HR because it deals with evaluations in general. In the interim, we had the hearing about the coaches. My guess is that some of the insight we learned during those hearings has been incorporated into this policy. So in that sense, it would be an improvement that needs to be reconsidered, whether by this committee or the other committee, and I'm happy to take it back to policy.
And that's why, for me, it would be very nice to hear how those, just, the thought process in those changes. So, but we'll do that at committee level, right? Thank you.
Dr. Maritaki?
Yes, thank you. I was just curious, since this new policy essentially focuses the policy language to coaches only and not the academic advisors, will there be a parallel policy for those advisors?
Yes.
And have we taken that up yet, or is that in the future yet?
We were told by Mrs. Susing that we would be taking it up. We passed this through, I think, in April, but that follow-up has not come in the
Okay.
transition.
Thank you.
Mr. Hollowell?
Just one other final point. If we're going to get a policy that has this many changes to it, we need a clean copy so we can know what it actually, it's almost impossible for me to read this thing. And if we need, I'm sure the secretaries can figure out how to make the color thing work, because it's very difficult to figure out what's being added and subtracted.
May I say something?
Ms. O'Gara?
So currently, the advisors in the school district, which 99% of them are already employed by the Nashua School District, do not receive an evaluation.
Ms. Van Twyver?
Is that the agreement of the administration? Because before they were, supposed to be anyways.
Since I have been here, I have not seen any evaluation in my 9 years of an advisor.
Thank you.
Mr. Kaufman?
You said that these advisors would most likely have been existing employees. Would that be teachers that pick up an advisory for a club or something like that? Is that?
Typically, they are in the teacher group. One or two might be in another position in the district. I think we've had a para educator maybe. And I only know of one person at one time that was not already regularly employed faculty.
So would the evaluation of that individual as someone currently employed by the district, would their supervisor that their existing supervisor who would perform their review would have no knowledge of their advisory work and therefore not comment on that in their review? Is that generally?
I have seen no reviews on any advisor position, whether or not they're already employed by the district or not.
Okay.
Mrs. Zine?
Is that standard in other districts, or is that just, to me, anybody who works for us should have some oversight. I mean, how do you know we're getting anything for our money? If no, am I hearing that nobody's doing anything to make sure these people are doing a decent job?
I don't know what other districts are doing.
Mr. Hollowell?
So I think the challenge is that we don't have a director of extracurricular advisors. So we don't really have a process. We don't have an administration in process to oversee advisors, right? So I guess you could argue maybe it's the principal at each school. We're talking about a lot of advisors. Many of them, these are not, I mean, these are positions that are often, we're kind of begging people to take them so that we can have these advisories. So I don't know. I'm not sure we want to put a formal process in place.
I'm going to speak up because I think many of them are paid. They get a stipend, and maybe we should assign the assistant principals to at least do some type of an evaluation. Probably would not be in detail, but I think maybe if we have 4 assistant principals at each high school, if they each took, I don't know how many groups there are, how many clubs there are, but you know, if these people are getting stipends, they do affect the kids and what the students are doing. So I think that might be something to look into. Just my opinion.
Well, and that can obviously be discussed in committee when it goes back to committee. It's just an area that maybe a little conversation would be good.
Maybe administration could get us an idea of how many extracurricular activities we have people in place that are being paid stipends for their work with these. Sorry, more work.
So for each stipend, in the teacher contract, there's one person at North and one person at South, and then the middle school stipends are outlined in the contract as well. So,
Are you talking the activities coordinator?
no, these extracurricular advisors are listed in an appendix in the teacher's contract along with the coaches.
Okay. Do you have any idea how many there are? No? Okay, we can look that up. That should be easy. Mr. Hollowell?
Are you differentiating between a paid advisor and an unpaid advisor? Because there are plenty of unpaid advisors.
I think at this point, I'm looking at the paid advisors. Mr. Kaufman?
I think you can make the argument that anybody working with the students, any adult working with the students in any capacity, should have some level of supervision from an administrative perspective, if they're paid or not.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think administration, if there were problems, if somebody went to administration, I think they'd be addressing any issues, especially the serious issues. But I think when somebody's being paid for it, it's just a little bit different in my book.
And I would agree, but right now it seems like there's not a lot of accountability in this space. So I think if it's not a formal review, at least there should be a process identified for, I'll just call it escalation of an issue, so that everybody's clear what it is for both people who do receive a stipend and for volunteers that may fall outside that.
Mr. Hollowell?
So, 2 things. I believe there are plenty of unpaid coaches. I don't know that they're covered or not covered by the policy that was just before us. Somebody answer that question? I presume they're not, because I don't.
There's never been a formal process of evaluating volunteer coaches.
And the other thing, I guess I'd caution the board this is a relatively small amount of time that people are spending on these things, and I don't think we should invent an entire bureaucracy to manage it. I do agree that there should be some level, so there is a problem with an advisor, right? There's somebody to address. I can think of at least one case in the past where that might have been handy. So I can understand that, but let's not go overboard when we make our policy. It can't be as formal, for instance, as we have an athletic director, who that's part of her duty is to oversee people. While you can say it can be a principal or assistant principal, they're doing all kinds of other things too, and can be a lot of different people doing small things at each school, so.
And I understand your point, but I don't think we ought to ignore the fact that people are getting paid for particular jobs to help students, and we have to make sure that it is helping students and that there is no negative effects from what's being done. Thank you. Anybody else? Okay.
I'll just say one last thing. If we don't have an administrators in place to overview, then maybe do it from the bottom up and let the students do the evaluation. That's always going to be interesting. But you'll weed out, you got to have something. If you're not willing to make the investment to evaluate people on your own because of limitations on whatever, then I'll say maybe from the bottom up. And I understand people cringe at that thought because students and parents could be quite vicious, and we've known that to be the case. But you still need accountability. You're going to have to figure out how to put it out there.
Mr. Hollowell.
Expressly forbidden in the teacher's contract, and 99% of these people are going to be teachers.
All right, well, for the ones that are not teachers, I would still make the argument with their volunteers.
Mrs. Eam?
I don't want to prolong this conversation, but there surely must be, if I'm a volunteer, there surely has to be a hierarchy. For instance, as a volunteer, when I need something, if I come to a problem, there has to be a process in place for that. And to some degree, that will take care of these people who are volunteers. Because in that process, if you're helping them with the mechanics that they need, then you're going to have an ear to what they're doing. And if they need help, then I would hope that is going to be expressed to Mrs. Gingras, and then she can try it. But that should all be clearly defined. Even if they are volunteers, they should have somebody that they can go to and say, this is what I need, this is the problems I'm having, whatever. So, but I promise I won't say anything else, so you can go to number 3.
Okay. Mr. Hollowell.
Yeah, I'll move to the next item, which is surprisingly relevant to Mrs. Seam's comment. Move to approve the revised job description for Ms. Hines.
Second.
Second. Discussion? Ms. Van Twyver?
Mrs. Hines has done quite a few things with the city, outreach and everything, and I'm wondering, of those items that have been deleted from her job description, thank you, who's going to be doing that, or are they just going to go by the wayside?
What specific things are you referring to?
Well, first of all is the volunteers, so we need to know who's going to be doing that. And
I would imagine the schools will be doing that on an individual basis. They have to pay $25 to be part of the Blue Ribbon Committee. And when volunteers come in, they have to sign a book to say how many hours that they have volunteered each time they come in. So I'm guessing that would be done at the schools.
You're guessing that it would be done at the schools?
I don't see why it wouldn't be, and I bet there are some schools that have the number exactly each week.
How about the district liaison to the Chamber of Commerce and Rotary clubs? Is she doing that anymore?
I think the superintendent had that in one of her duties that she would be doing. Am I wrong?
No, I don't think you're wrong. If I might answer a couple of the questions that came up, Ms. Van Twyvers and then Mr. Boucher would like to speak as well. The volunteer coordination, as I understand it, having met with Mrs. Hines, is going to go to the building level, and that building administrators will be responsible for the volunteer coordination efforts. Mr. Boucher is going to speak to grants and his responsibilities there.
Mr. Boucher?
Yes, I'd like to confirm that the volunteer responsibility has already been communicated to the building principals.
Thank you, and if I might continue regarding the community outreach, I think one of your questions was liaison to some of the community service groups. Some of that work I will take on. You saw that as part of my transition plan, although I don't want to misrepresent what my commitment will be to that. I think that Mrs. Hines, in her role as Director of Communications, will continue to serve as a liaison with some of those community activities. She has already done that. She was present for the Nashua Goes Back to School, which was an activity in late August. She helped coordinate an interview for me today. Hope you all tune in to I'm going to get the initials wrong, MSN. It's a local program.
WSMN.
And she set that up. It's going to be on our website and televised, so she's still doing that in her capacity as a Director of Communications. So those activities will continue.
Will there be changes to the Assistant Superintendent's job description to put in there about the duties that he's taken on?
I believe that part of the responsibility and oversight of grants already exists in the Assistant Superintendent job descriptions.
Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Hollowell, then Mr. Kaufman.
So Ms. Hines often helps to coordinate the Donors Choose grant program. It'll be Mr. Boucher now, or still Ms. Hines?
My understanding is that that program is quite dear to her, and she would like to retain coordination and oversight of it.
Good.
Okay. Mr. Kaufman?
Thank you. I would note in the first paragraph, the last sentence says, the director will also provide support to principals in communicating to stakeholders. I will, by looking at this document, make reference that there's no reference to supporting the board. And I know in the past, press releases, I believe Ms. Hines has written and drafted that the board has issued. So I would like to see something in this job description to reflect that this position, Director of Communications, is actually also somewhat of a support position to the board in communicating to stakeholders as well. Could be internally within the school district or externally to the community or even job search, all those things. That's a resource to the board. I don't see that in here. So to make that simple, I would make a proposal that the last sentence be amended. The director will also provide support to principals and the board in communicating to stakeholders.
Anybody have any comments?
Nobody has seconded the motion.
Okay. Do we have a second? I'll second for purposes of discussion.
I'd just like to add that all the buildings have a volunteer coordinator assigned to the task of doing the paperwork and dealing with the volunteers. And they would work with the building principals. So there is a structure already set up.
Mr. Hollowell?
This board has very few positions that answer to the board. The superintendent, and we used to have a board secretary, which this board chose to reduce that to just a transcriptionist because we were trying to save money and we were doing it by saving these things. So I'm against adding items that support directly to the board unless the board is now saying they would like to hire a secretary position to support them. Not saying they're not going to do it. I guess I'm just saying I don't think it should be anybody's job description. It's something they may do. Sometimes it's Ms. Hines. Sometimes it's one of the secretaries in the superintendent's office that puts together those. Often it is the superintendent themselves that writes the press release because they're the ones that are closest to whatever we're doing.
Mr. Kaufman?
But typically in organizations, you should have a focal point for the, on the press release, it typically says to whom to respond to if you have any questions. If it seems to me the director of communications would be the appropriate person in the district as the primary outreach, formal outreach, especially in the notion of a press release or something like that. So, Mr. Hollowell, I have to disagree with you. I think I've experienced it in my brief time on the board where Ms. Hines has written press releases specifically for the board. To my knowledge, she wrote it. That was my understanding. If someone else wrote it, I don't know. But I do believe that she was the person that had that responsibility. And if she's not enabling and helping the school board communicate outbound, then I would question the need for the entire position, because to me, I see that as a key role.
Can I just say, when I look at this and I read it, the Director of Communications is responsible for communication strategy at the district level, promoting community awareness of the work of the district. And I look at the board as part of the district. So to me, that's covered. I think being part of the district, I think that represents us. That's just my personal opinion. I feel comfortable at that point.
Motion on the floor?
Yeah.
Is to
I
amend.
have,
The motion on the floor is to amend.
okay, yeah, and I did second purpose of discussion, yes. Okay. Do you want to read the motion back?
I believe the motion is to have the words "and the board" added in the sentence. Director will also provide support to principals and the board in communicating to stakeholders.
Do we want to roll, voice vote? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
There's only 3 members of the, oh, sorry.
Oh, so that's right, I'm the alternate, so Dr. Murtaki's here.
Dr.
I'm sorry.
Murtaki showed up, so there's only 3 votes. So let's have a roll call, because now it's
Okay.
confusing.
Okay.
Mrs. Oden,
No.
Dr. Murtaki,
Yes.
Mr. Hollowell's no. Motion fails. Back to the main motion, which is the approval of the revised job description.
Okay. Ms. O'Hensy?
I just have a quick question. Since we're moving the volunteers to be under the guidance of the building principals as part of this rearrangement, would the building principals also be in a position to do a perfunctory evaluation of the volunteers? If this goes back to what we were saying in the previous item. I mean, in terms of, you don't really evaluate a volunteer to say that they're getting promoted or not, but that they're doing the function that they've been assigned to do. They're not causing any problems. Would this be something that we could, in the policy, would this be impinging on the principals to ask them to keep track of their volunteers and just evaluate that, that they meet all requirements or they're satisfactory or something like that at the end of the year?
It's my understanding that they would perform that oversight responsibilities for ensuring that the volunteers are coordinated and doing the things that the principals have asked them to do.
But these volunteers are not the athletic volunteers, the coaches, or the extracurricular volunteers. Or that's a separate set of volunteers? Or are these the same volunteers?
I think that the answer to your question is that they're different volunteer groups, that the people who volunteer at Ledge Street are not necessarily the same people that volunteer for Mrs. Gingras.
Okay.
Can I just add, too, the principals do ensure that the volunteers go through and have a security check to make sure with the police department, they're fingerprinted, and that even goes for field trips. So there is a level of that type of evaluation to make sure it's somebody that's, doesn't have a problem being in the school with the police department. So they do that. And usually, from what I've seen, the volunteers are pretty much needed by the teachers, and the teachers are the ones assigning a lot of the work from what I've seen in the schools. And then you have the PTOs, which are volunteers. Yeah. My only comment with this is looking at the responsibilities. I would change the title of this to Communications Coordinator, because I see this person coordinating a lot of the communications of the district. I think that would be more appropriate when I look at, it comes out on the e-news or whatever. It's coordinating a lot of news from the schools, different levels, what's going on. I think that would be more appropriate for what's going on with the coordination of communication. So I think the title would be more appropriate as Communications Coordinator. Mr. Hollowell?
So a communications coordinator would mean to me that it's not somebody who actually does the communications, which she does. I'm not sure why. I think Director of Communication Coordinator makes it less restrictive what her roles are, whereas Director of Communication is more broad. In other words, if there's going to be some sort of communication, she should be involved in helping us strategize about how we do it. So I'm not in favor of adding that.
Dr. Murataki?
Yes. Is there a salary differential between coordinators and directors in this district?
I'm guessing there, Dana?
Yes, there is.
Thank you.
Can you clarify that?
Directors usually have a higher level of salary than coordinators do in the district.
And are they also full-time, now that this is part-time?
They are mostly full-time, but you can have a part-time.
Director?
Somebody else? Anybody else?
Thank you.
Okay. The motion on the floor is,
To approve the revised job description for Director of Communications.
all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes.
Oh, well.
Personnel recommendations, I'm sorry, Mr. Hollowell?
Move to approve the revised personnel recommendations, I think.
Need a second? Dr. Murray?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Move to adjourn?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed?
Excuse me, but isn't there a second position here that's listed that has not been discussed?
That's the old one. It's the former one.
I'm sorry?
It's the old one.
Oh, this is the previous one. Okay, thank you.
Adjourned at 7:04.